In this video, I'm going to try to help you to get your VFX skills in Blender to the next level. We are trying to make a hole into the ground where you can jump over just touching a few bits and pieces floating in the air. So basically, it's called a set extension. We're extending our set into the abyss, and now I'm going to show you how you can do that too. Let's jump right into Blender. I'm using Blender version 4.3, but any Blender version later than 2.8 should do. So what we need is a video of you jumping over the ground. There's a few things we need to do here. If you want to use the footage I'm using, I have a link in the description. Usually I do that only for my Patreons, but for this particular case, I think you can just use mine. So the Dropbox link in the description is going to get you the footage so you can work on the same footage. Or even you can look at my Blender scene the way it looked in the end. What I'm trying to build now is simpler than that. I want to go through the basics so you can be as creative as you want on your own. I just want to show you the basics so you can get started. So when you open Blender and you have all your footage ready, you need to motion track the footage. So let's go to the motion tracking tab. If you don't have it, up here, go on the plus sign, VFX, and motion tracking. This is what the motion tracking looks like. We have our camera here, we have our graph editor down here, and here we're going to see the actual video. So let's import it. Open video for whole. This is my video. Now we need to track this, and usually when you have footage of people walking around, it's a little harder to track. So I shot my footage a little wider than necessary. So I would say you're going to do the same thing. And when you have direct sunlight, I recommend have the sun in the back. So it's backlit. If it's front lit, you could get into trouble with some of those VFX. I'm going to show you why later. Anyways, let's track this shot. So the first thing I do is I set scene frames and prefetch. That loads my video into my RAM, so it's easier to look through it. See, it's all smooth. Now under the tracking settings, I usually use fast motion or blurry footage. Either one would do. In our motion model, I use perspective. Now I'm just going to detect features, and that's going to detect lots of trackers. Under the threshold, I play around with the settings a little because I don't need that many tracks. Let's go to this point. That should be enough. I'm also going to delete all the trackers on my own body because I'm not going to need those, because I want to track the camera movement, not my self movement. So I'm just going to delete those with X, maybe those two, because I'm going to walk through those, so those are not going to be necessary. In the end, we need a good track, so let's make sure we're not going to delete more than that. So now I select them all with A and track forward. And amazing. Now in the track already we can see that mostly it looks pretty good, but I have those few tracks which kind of do whatever they want to do, and I can just go right away and delete those tracks which I believe I'm not going to use them anyway. So once we deleted the ones we don't want, we can go to the very last frame, detect features again, and track backwards. So if you track your footage backwards and forwards, that should give you enough information for the whole scene to work. And again, I'm going to delete the ones which obviously do not align with my camera movement. Once you feel good about that and you feel like you have a good amount of tracks, let's go to the next tab, the Solve tab. Here we have to select a few things. Usually I start with selecting keyframe, focal length, optical center, and radial distortion. I select all of them and solve camera motion. That process usually takes a while in the beginning because you have way more trackers than you need, because what we're trying to do is filter out all the bad tracks until we only have the good ones left, because if you keep the bad ones in it, the average solve error is going to be higher and the general track is not going to be as good. So we're trying to track our camera so we can add our visual effects in it as good as possible. We are trying to achieve a solve error of less than 1 pixel. And once it's done, you can see the solve error in the top right corner. It says 2.13 pixels, which is not terrible, but not the result we're looking for. But once you did that, the nice thing is you can go under cleanup, go to like some kind of a middle frame here, and under cleanup, we're gonna go on clean track. Now for the reprojection error, we just crank up the number to, let's go something high. Let's go with 3 pixels. You can see mostly the tracks in the background are being selected, and those are the most useless ones anyways, because our visual effects are going to be right here. So those are the important ones. Everything in the background is semi-important. So let's just get rid of those in the background, and now let's solve the camera again and hope the self error is going to be better. Something interesting happened. My self error is skyrocketed. It's on 221 pixels now. Could have multiple reasons. It could be the keyframes which are selected are not the best ones. I could manually select my keyframes and solve it again. It might get better. See, just by changing the keyframes manually, I put one on my first frame and one on a very late frame at 217. Now my self error is 0.9, and I'm probably going to leave it there. And to be sure, what you can do is look at your blue line here. The blue line indicates how good the track is. This blue line has to be as straight as possible. Here it has a few jumps, here too, and here's another one. So what I'm going to do is delete a few more tracks until I get a better self error. So I'm going to go on clean tracks again. Reprojection error, last time it was over 3. Now let's go over 2. I just don't want to delete too many. Delete those again, camera motion, and let's hope for better results. Now it's on 0.7. It's not bad, but I think we can get it under 0.5. Awesome. Now it's on 0.5. I'm going to double check my little blue line here. It still has a few jumps here and there, but for tutorial purposes, it's going to be good enough. Again, for you, try to get this number as low as possible. 0.1 would be awesome, but anything under 1 pixel is going to be good enough. Now we need to set up a few things, because right now, yes, we do have all those tracks, but those trackers are not saved into the camera movement yet. So what we need to do is, first of all, select one marker and set our origin. You see on the top right camera, our camera already jumped somewhere. So that's the first step. Now we have to create our ground. So we're going to select 3 trackers which are somewhere on the ground and set floor. Now our camera is oriented the way where the ground would be. So it's the right angle of the camera. Now we need to select 2 markers which are around 1 meter apart, or it could be any distance. I usually try to estimate a meter because I have a good idea of what a meter is. In the best case scenario, you have something measured. For example, you have a marker on this car. You know exactly the width of this car and you could measure that, but I'll just estimate a meter. This is around a meter, and go on set scale. This is set to 1 because it's 1 meter, set scale. Now that should be around a meter. It's probably more than a meter, so I'm just going to increase this number a little. And now I set up my background and set up tracking scene. Now you can see that my 3D ground in my 3D model I have in here are tracked to my footage. You can see when I scrub through it, it's moving exactly like my real camera, which is exactly what I want. I'm gonna set up my origin again to make sure they're at the exact same spot. Like here, for example, my 3D person should be right behind my real person, but he's way too big. So I'm just gonna set the scale one more time to make sure they are somewhat the same size, more or less at least. And that works just fine. So when I scrub through it, I can see everything is moving the right way. But one more thing I want to do is I'm from my origin point, which is this one, I'm going to select one on the right or left to adjust my x-axis. So now he's looking straight. So the y-axis is going to the distance, x-axis going left and right, and z-axis up and down, of course. And now I'm pretty much done here. I can do the actual work which is necessary to achieve this effect. I'm going to go back to my layout tab. So on my top view here, I can see through my camera. And while we are here, make sure camera to view, when you hit the N button, you can see that I go to view. Camera to view is not selected, because if it is selected and I move my camera around here, I'm going to ruin my CG camera and I don't want to move it anymore. So check this off. So now when I accidentally move around here, it gets me out of my camera view into my viewport. When I hit 0 on my numpad, it goes back to it. So make sure camera to view is not selected. Now all those dots here on the ground basically give me an idea where my trackers are in CG. So when I can turn those trackers on and off, and that helps me to organize my scene. So when I have my guy jumping here and I want to add floor, just like where the foot is, those trackers on the ground in CG can give me a good indicator where I am in 3D space. In best case scenario, I would have a 3D tracker just like where the foot is. I don't. I have one next to it, so I can estimate it a little. Okay, The next thing what you got to do is like, because the way Blender works, it automatically makes you a background collection. I'm just going to delete it for now. I'm going to keep the ground for now. It also creates a light. I don't want it, so I just want to keep the ground. So the ground is a good indicator where my CG scene is happening, what is on the floor. So let's get rid of it for now and just turn it off in the viewport. So the next step is we need to make our hole. So I have to figure out where exactly is this hole happening. So here I'm standing right at the edge. I'm going to turn up my video opacity so you can see it better. So here I'm right at the edge. So I could start the hole right at the edge of my foot. I mean, technically I could myself make stand on a thing too, but I feel like it's better if all of this stuff stays real and then the hole happens here. But it's just my personal thing. You can do whatever you want, but let me just go through the basics so you'll understand what you need to do. In my original video, I was using a cylinder. I made a hole out of a cylinder, put it into the ground, whatnot. In this video, just to keep it simple, I'm just going to make a cube. Shift A, make a cube, bring this cube into the ground. So when I look from side view, it touches all those trackers here. It is actually in the ground, so he's basically standing on it right now. Now I'm gonna hit S, scale it just amongst the Y and X axis. Let's say it's till here. I'm probably gonna adjust it so the hole starts where my feet are touching the ground. But it also has to stop when I reach the end here. I'm just gonna go in edit mode, hit the face, and bring this closer here so I'm not touching the ground anymore. So this is going to be my hole. Now right now it's not a hole, it's just a cube. In order to make it a hole, in edit mode, I just hit select the face, the top face, and just delete with X the face. Now this is an actual hole, and that's very good for the beginning. But now I have to jump on those little objects which are floating or they're on poles, whatever you want to do. Like I said, it's not a creative tutorial. I just want to show you the basics so you can make with a scene like this whatever you want. So I'm just going to call this one hole, and I'm just going to turn this off for now. So now I have to figure out where am I actually landing. And for that, what I like to do, I'm just going to make myself a few planes. Let's start with the first one. I'm just going to make myself a plane, just big enough that I could be standing on it. Now I move it G and X on the X axis to where I believe I'm standing right now. So G, Y, I think this is where I'm standing. So this is my starting point. Then from here I jump to the next one. So I'm just going to duplicate it with Shift D. I'm going to duplicate it, hit X on my keyboard, bring this over here. So this is where I'm landing. Now I'm checking the next one. This is my second foot. Again, Shift D and X, bring this over here. The next step is went a little to the right. So G, Y, bring this a little further. Let me get rid of this guy. A little further, so I'm actually landing on it. G, X, just position so you actually land on those planes. And then the last one is where the hole ends. Again, let me show the hole. So I have those floating planes here. The first one is not super important. The first one I'm not really using. The first one here is mainly just that I have a reference in 3D that I know where I'm actually starting. Awesome. So now when we look at it, I can see I actually jump through that. The reason why the character is actually not on top of it is a compositing problem, because that's something I'm not going to do in Blender. I'm going to use, I think I'm going to show it to you in After Effects and in DaVinci how to do that, because I know most of my viewers, they still use After Effects, even though I do recommend using DaVinci instead. But I'm going to show you both to how to composite it in the end. But generally, this is the way how you build your scenes. And now if I want to, I just go on my planes here. Let's go in edit mode and extrude just down so I actually have boxes. I'm going to do the same thing with that one. In mode, extrude with E, Z, go down so I have a few boxes. So now they're just boxes floating. Again, you can be as creative as you want. You can make them stand on poles like I did. So let's use a cylinder, size it down, scale it up on the Z axis, bring it right in the center of those cubes. G, Z, bring it into the ground. I'm gonna duplicate it, bring it here, So now they're standing on poles, just like that. And you can be as creative as you want. But one thing you really need to do is work with materials a little, because it's one thing to just give your hole a material. The top layers here, like this face here, just the top face and this top face, they need the actual video as a material projected from the camera. I'm going to show you in a second how to do that. First, I'm going to give everything else a material. So I'm going to start with the hole, go in textures, and from Polyhaven I just give it a random material, adjust it, it looks right. Now my poles, I'm also going to give a material. Just going to make it myself real quick. I'm going to make it metallic. And now my cubes here need two materials. The first one is the, again, you can do whatever you want. That's just, I think, what I did. I gave it just the same material my hole had. We can go to material preview. So basically it looks the same like this. But the face, the top face, that has to be a different material. It has to be the actual video. So here under material, I'm going to give it plus a new material, hit on new. And I can already assign this. So I'm going to go in edit mode, select the top face here, click on the material I just created. Let's call it street material and click assign. So right now it's not the street material, but it doesn't matter. We're going to work on this in a second. So I'm just going to do the same thing with my other block here. I'm going to select the top face, give it a new material. We already created it, so I can just find it, street material, and assign. Okay, right now it's just white. That's not what we want, obviously. So I'm going to import my video, the video I recorded. I'm just going to import it as a video texture. And if I connect this with my surface, obviously it doesn't look right now. It just projects a video as is. But if I use my texture coordinate node, so Control T, the mapping and texture coordinate node, you can turn this in your plugins. And now, instead of projecting as a UV, I project it from window. So from this view, it's going to look very bad. In this view, this is going to look just right. So when I go through the footage, oh, one thing I forgot, make sure auto refresh is on, otherwise the video is not going to be long enough, and the video should be as long, the frame should be as long as the actual video, so 292. So now the video is actually playing. Again, don't ignore this view. This view is important because this is how we look through the camera. So when he steps in here, we can see the foot is already there. So I don't need to composite anything, like the foot doesn't have to be perfectly cut out in this particular spot. And I still get my shadow information, and all of that is real. And that way I just jump over this hole. I still need to composite that in post to make sure I'm in front of the VFX, but that's not going to be a big deal. In the actual video, I actually manipulated those boxes a little more. You know, I subdivided it and sculpted a little to make it look like more organic. Right now I just have cubes, which is very boring, but again, it's a basic tutorial for you to understand how you can make an effect like that. So you can be as creative as you want with this. So now it's time, let's look through cycles, what it actually looks like right now. As you can see, we don't see anything. You know why? Because we don't have any lights in our scene. In order to create some lights, let's turn on our ground layer, which is just a shadow catcher. I'm just going to turn it, scale it up a little. And in order to set up your lights the way it would actually look is what I do. With Shift A, I'm going to make a cube, put it somewhere here on the side. If you want to see your video back, just go in your render settings and turn on transparent so we can actually see our video in the back. The hole is gone right now because my shadow catcher, my ground, is on top of it right now. That's why we don't see the floor right now, but it doesn't matter. What we're trying to do is set up our lights the way they look in real life. So for that, important is that it's actually touching the ground. This cube, I'm going to bring it somewhere close to my subject, myself here. And now I can try to align the lighting. So I'm going to Shift A, go on light, set the sunlight, because this is how I'm lit right now. This is my sunlight. And now I'm just oriented the way I feel like the sun should be. So to make it easier, I'm going to make this cube also smaller. basically like my size. Let me go to my item settings. Like right now it's 1.63 meters, and I'm like bent right now, so that should kind of work. So the shadow should be the same length, and luckily it almost is. It's pretty perfect actually, like that. And this is basically what you need to do. The problem is, why is it so black on this side? I'm not black, because there's only one light source and there's nothing in the scene which would bounce the light back, because light, the way it works is it would be just bouncing back and forth. In real life, the sun bounces back and forth until it reaches back to me. Plus we have the sky, the blue sky, which is also illuminating everything. That's why it looks so blue. So now we have two options. Either we rebuild our environment and put some objects here so the light actually be reflecting back onto my object, or what I like to do is I make another sunlight and have it just straight down, go in my light settings, make the angle 180 degrees, make this a little blue until it has the same kind of tint like my sky. I can also, instead of doing that, I just pick the sky. So I pick the picker, pick my sky color, and that would be like the right amount. And now I'm go in my first sun, and now I increase the strength until the darkness value of my digital sun meets the same amount of my real sun, something like that. Right now the color is not right. The color is just black. The real shadow was blue tinted because again it comes from the sky. But this is usually something I do in post-production. You can do that in Blender, but I usually do that in post. Now we don't need this cube anymore. Let's turn it off. Let's remove our ground. So now you can see that our ground is actually lit the way the real life should be lit, which is great. But of course you can manipulate it a little more. For example, what I did was I made a volume cube because I wanted to show it, okay, this is hell down there. So I made a volume, which is always a great way to make something look more realistic. So I'm going to make another cube, scale it up, bring it into the ground, more or less the same size of my ground cube, or like the same shape, like that. Now I'm going to give it a volume shader. I'm going to delete the principled BSDF and give it a principled volume instead. Connect this with volume, and now I have haze here. I'm going to decrease the density until it's something to my liking. And you can see it's only mostly affected where the sun is hitting. The anisotropy usually should be on 0.6, which is interesting because it's only front lit right now. Just the bounce makes it backlit. That's what the anisotropy is for. And that's basically what I did. And I believe I added like a little light in there. Let's go and make another light, area light. Right now it's pointing up. So I'm gonna RY rotate it 180 degrees, bring it into the ground, scale it up. I also gave it like a red color. You can see it's like lit from the bottom as if, you know, that's where hell was, you know. Anyways, that's what I did. But let's go through the important stuff for like the rendering once you're done with your scene, what you need to consider. Right now, I would at least need 2 different render layers in order to be able to composite it properly together. I need my video, everything, the CG stuff I did, and the shadow separately. Also, only if I have other objects like this one. If there was an actual object here and I had a shadow catcher, then yes, then I would need it. But if you just go from there, 1 layer would be enough. But let's say our scene is a little more complex than that. Let's say I have this street sign here and it doesn't look perfectly integrated because we don't have any shadow. I would have shadow if I had my ground layer, then I still have my shadow, but the shadow would still be black. So I need to render the shadow separately. Okay, let's do a no parking sign. I have 1 here in the back, so 1 here in the front. So if it's in the front, it looks pretty good, right? Because I know the video is behind it, but here the CG sign is on top of it. So I would need to composite it in a way where I'm like, I have a few foreground objects and a few background objects and my middle ground, of course. And that's like a compositing question. And in my case, it was like smoke in the foreground. I had some signs in the foreground, but I also obviously had the hole and some signs in the background. So in order to set this up properly, what I need to do is make different render layers. And now I'm going to show you how to do that. First of all, I don't want the shadow capture to be all over the place because that would block the hole. So I'm going to select my ground layer, go under modifiers, and give it a Boolean modifier. And as a Boolean object, I'm going to use my hole. Now the hole is being used as a Boolean, so it's cutting out my hole in the ground. So now I can position my sign here in the back, so it's actually, let's put it right here. I'm going to turn off those tracking markers because I can't see nothing. So now what we need is one render layer for the foreground, one for the background, and one for the shadow. So I already have two: foreground and my background. In my background, I'm going to make everything, every collection which is not foreground, I'm going to make it indirect only. So it's not actually going to be in the scene, it just interacts with the lighting. So everything what is not foreground, I'm going to put in one collection. So I'm going to put the ground, basically everything. I select everything, hit M, put it in main, because now I can turn it on and off the way I want it. Oh, the hole has to be in main also. So now you can see better. If I make it indirect only, it disappears. I'm just going to put this sign also in the background so you can see the shadow better, and have another object in the foreground right here. So if I make my main collection just indirect only, then I can see only the shadows here. You can see it in the back. I only see the shadows here, and that's for my main collection. Now when I go on this collection, I make it my foreground collection. That's my background collection. If I turn this to indirect only, my foreground button becomes indirect only, so I can only see the foreground. That's why I have this button here. Now I need one more collection, which is my shadow catcher collection. So I'm going to put my shadow catcher, new collection, into shadow collection. I'm going to make a new view layer, call it shadow, and in this view layer I'll make all the other collections indirect only. So here I only see the shadows. The background is all my hole and my signs in the background. In my shadow, only the shadows. And now when I go in my compositor, you can see there's lots of nodes which are mostly not interesting. What we can basically just delete all of them besides our render layers. That's what we need. So this is our background. Let's just drag it here. We have foreground, background. We need one more, Shift D, make another one for shadow. Now we have to plug it into a file output node. So Shift A, type in file output. And here we can input images. This is just the foreground. Right now we only have one. So I'm just going to click here, hit N, bring this down here to nodes. We can add more, so we need like 3 total. So I'm going to have one for the foreground and rename it, one for the background, and one for the shadow. So I'm going to plug in those images, background into background and shadow into shadow. Select my folder where I want to render to, accept. Now we're ready to go to render this bad boy and composite that in DaVinci or After Effects. Make sure your frame rate is the same one you recorded your video in, 30 frames per second. I don't need it 4K. One important thing is when you render this, make sure that you render in RGBA, so you always have an alpha channel, otherwise it's not going to work. So make sure RGBA is selected. Color depth 8 or 16 probably won't make a difference for you. And compression, the lower the better, but the bigger the files. And then render the animation. Alright, now it's rendered, so let's get into After Effects to composite all that, and after that I'm going to show you real quick how to do that in DaVinci too. So I imported all my 3 video files into After Effects. The way you do that, you just double click here, select whichever one you want to select, hit PNG sequence and import. I did that already, so I have my 3 files here: foreground, shadow, and background. Now before I drag it into my composition, make sure the frame rate is right, because if it's not, the tracking and everything is not going to work. So click on one of them, go on this little interpret footage icon and change the frame rate to whatever frame rate you were using recording the footage, which in my case it's 30. If you're not sure, go in your video, do the same thing and see, okay, it's 30. Now do that for all layers. For the shadow, I did that already. For the foreground, 30 frames per second, and also for the background, 30 frames per second. Now when I drag and drop all of those in there. I'm gonna have my video footage just on top of each other. Right now you see the scale is off. This is not right because I rendered in a smaller resolution than I record the video in. So I'm just gonna select all of them, hit S, and scale them all up until they have the right size, which is right here. Now we basically have the same result like in Blender. Now we have to get this guy in front of this but behind this. So in front of the whole and the whole background sequence, but still behind all my foreground elements. That's why I recorded or I rendered the foreground elements separately. So for that we need to rotoscope our person. That's how it works in After Effects. I duplicate my footage with Control D, I duplicate my footage, double click, and now I'm gonna select up here the rotor brush tool. I'm gonna draw a rough mask around my subject. Make sure you don't get any background in it, so be as evenly as possible. Cut it out, and also my arm here, and let go. Now After Effects is doing the rest, but it's still not perfect. Let's try to clean it up, making sure that everything what's supposed to be me is still in the footage, not the shadow, just me. That's why when you record that kind of footage, make sure that you separate yourself from the background as much as you can, because here you can see how I basically become one with the background. So it's going to be a little tricky to rotoscope that. Luckily, it doesn't have to be perfect most of the time. It just has to be perfect while I am over the hole. Let's just do as good of a job as we can. Try to clean everything up. Now if you think you did a good job, play the footage and it's going to rotoscope all the other frames also, so you don't have to do that frame by frame. It's going to do the rest automatically. Right now the layering, or like the position of our layers, is important. On the very bottom here we have our video. Let's just turn everything off. We have our video. After that, we have our rotoscope. Nothing is going to change because nothing is behind it right now. After that, we have our background and shadow. So if I bring my video on top of it, voila, it brings my video person, rotoscope person, in front of the hole. So now that's what we want. And on top of that, we're going to have our video, our foreground render. So it's still this layering, so I can turn this off, then I can see the background better. So that's how you do that. And make sure your rotoscope job is as good as possible, because the better that is, I just rushed it, the better the results are going to be. And then you can obviously fine-tune the colors, so to make everything match better the environment. You see like there's a little glare going on. You should put also a glare on your CG elements and stuff like that. And of course I told you can adjust the shadow color individually. So when I zoom in on the shadows here, this is like pure black. You can adjust the colors here in the background. Let me turn off the foreground to lift the blues of the shadows a little to match the shadows of your environment a little better, and so on. Let's move on to DaVinci and I can show you how you can do that there. So first I'm going to get my footage in here, my foreground, my background, and the actual video. There we go. Now I'm gonna drag and drop it in the same order. So we have our video, then we have our background, our foreground. Make sure, or hit R and change the frame rate to your actual frame rate. So it's now nicely composited together. And of course, between the foreground and the background, we need another layer of video, so I can bring this in between. Now I'm going to select all of those, right click and make a fusion clip. And inside of fusion, what we need to do is, this is the video I have to rotoscope. So I'm going to click on it, control space, and type in magic mask, add. Now it's adding a magic mask effect. Now I'm going to draw a rough line what I want to cut out and what I don't want to cut out. Now I track forward and backward, and I hope it's going to do a good job. Of course I'm rushing it right now, so it's not going to be perfect, but you get the idea. There you see there is lots of artifacts. Yeah, the After Effects rotoscope did a better job from the get-go. But who knows, it might be good enough because we don't need this whole character to be rotoscoped, just parts of it. Now when we look at it, it is perfectly rotoscope. It's not perfectly rotoscope, but it's good enough because even like the problem zones which are happening behind here, it doesn't really matter because we don't have any 3D objects. If we did have more 3D objects here, then you would need to do a better job, but just like from one click, it doesn't look too bad, and that's how you can composite it all together. Now you also understand why we made this material for the street on top of here, because now all this here, like the foot and all that, it's all fully CG, really. It's in a 3D environment. Like all of this material on top of here and on top of here is just CG. So it's not from the, it is from the actual video, but it is projected from the camera view. That's how we can get those cool shadows, and they're just cut off because there's no object. The only issue here is when you really want to nitpick on the scene, the real problem is that we see the shadow of our cube here, we see it here, but we don't see my shadow. My shadow should technically be also on here, which there's also ways to do that, but this video is long enough as it is. Yes, those are the essentials, the basics, if you want to make a shot like that. I know there was a lot. If you have any questions, and I'm sure you do, please let me know in the comments below. Yeah, there's way more things I could talk about in this podcast, and I probably will, because I gotta tell you, making a scene like this is a lot of fun. Integrating 3D elements into your real life videos is fun as it is, but then basically creating negative space in your 3D scene is even better. So I hope that was helpful. Again, let me know in the comments below if you have any questions at all. Thank you so much for watching, and see you in the next video. Toodaloo!